Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Rails Board meeting. This is Friday, November 19th, 2021. I'm Tom Stagg, President of the Rails Board, and I call this meeting to order at 1 o'clock. Emily, will you please call roll?
Yes. Susan Busenbark. Ellie Cox.
Yes.
Alice Creason.
Here.
Robin Hellenthal.
Here.
Diane Hollister.
Here.
Chris Kenny.
Here.
Jennifer McIntosh.
Here.
Scott Poynton.
Here.
Patricia Smith.
Here.
Becky Spratford.
Here.
Thomas Stagg.
Here.
Beth Teppen.
Here.
Monica Tolva.
Here.
Welcome, Monica.
Thank you.
Alex Vancina.
Here.
And Karen Wojcik.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. And now on to the recognitions of guests and announcements. We will handle guest and public comments at the same time. Let's start here with guest in Burr Ridge. Monica, will you start?
Yes. Monica Harris, Rails.
Jim Krieger, Rails.
Emily Feister, Rails.
Dan Bass from Rails.
Whoa.
Okay. Any public comments in Burr Ridge? Okay. None being, let's move on to guest in East Peoria. Kendall, will you start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Kendall Larson, Rails, and I am the only guest here, and I have no comment.
Oh, well, thank you, Kendall. How about the Illinois State Library?
Greg McCormick.
And any public comments at this time, Greg?
No public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. Emily, will you do the names of the guests who are participating via Zoom?
We have Deirdre Brennan. I believe that's Paul.
That's all? Okay. If Emily has not read your name, please state your name and your affiliation. Emily, did you receive any public comments?
I did not.
Okay. If not, does anyone have any public comments at this time? Okay, next we have the oath of office. Monica Tolva is with us today. Welcome, Monica.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We welcome Monica. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to be on the Rails board?
Yes, thank you. Well, I have a great history of supporting and participating in regional library systems. I was a great fan of NSLS before it became a larger thing. I started my working career as a newspaper reporter for a daily paper in Geneva, Illinois. And then when the working conditions and hours got too great for me, I joined as a school librarian. I've been an elementary school librarian. Then I worked at Northern Illinois University Library in Hoffman Estates. I had a small stint as a public librarian, evenings and weekends at Arlington Heights Memorial Library. And then I've been here at Vernon Hills High School for coming up on 20 years.
Awesome, awesome. And now will you, and welcome aboard, and now will you please read the oath of office?
I do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Illinois, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of member of the Board of Directors of the Reaching Across Illinois Library System according to the best of my ability.
Thank you. Can we have a round of applause?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Glad you're aboard. Moving on to agenda item 6, the consent agenda. We have several items there. The adoption of the agenda, Rails board minutes of October 22nd, the special board meeting, Rails board meeting of October 22nd, regular meeting, the board meeting of October 22nd, closed session meeting, the executive board committee meetings of October 21st, And 6.6, approval of disbursements for October 2021. Does anyone wish to move any item to the regular agenda for further discussion? If not, may I have a motion and a second for approval of the consent agenda?
So moved. Hallie.
Hallie, okay, thank you, Hallie.
Second, Karen.
Karen, thank you, Karen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Next, we have Jim with his final report of his Rails career.
Okay, this is a financial report for the month of October. I'm gonna step back and take my mask off a little bit. Nothing too new to report. Our revenues were about $1.6 million below budget because we had only one area per capita grant payment through October. We noted last month that there were 3 live and learn payments in the hopper of $1,072,500 each. And we could expect them at any time. We didn't get them by the end of October, but we got 2 of them this morning. So we have, so next month will be much more closer to budget. But the payments come in sporadically through the year, but the payment history has improved tremendously over the last year. So last year we had all our payments in by May 1st, which was the earliest we had. We have 19 million of unassigned general fund cash, which would fund nearly 20 months of operations. And let's see what else. Our expenses. Oh yeah, investment income is $4,445 through the October. It's 54% below budget. We're going to talk a little bit about more about our investment strategy and what we plan to do when we do the depository resolution. An update on that, on what some plans are and what the outlook is. We have received 2 grants, or awarded 2 grants, one for extension of the L2 program product and another for cataloging. We will get these funds. There's 70,000 and 94,000 and change. We should be receiving these funds soon. We can spend up to that amount, and it appears that if we don't quite spend as much, we would return some, but we could spend up to 160,000. And that will help, that will count, help us against our $500,000 budgeted deficit. So that'll be a progress against that. Our expenditures through October were 105,000 below budget, mostly because of contractual services expenditures, which are lagging the budget a little bit on a monthly basis, and we haven't awarded any catalog membership grants yet. That's pretty much it on the financial report. I also wanted to give you a little update on all our transition issues and how we're doing since I'm going to be leaving. As most of you know, I've over the past years, quite a few years now, I've been on both the Limerick, which is our health insurance co-op board, and LIRA, which insures our liability, workers' comp, cyber, property, basically everything else. And I've been the treasurer of both of these. On Limerick, and so my membership of these boards has now ended. Sharon has been named my successor on the Limerick board until she can run for election in May. And of course, they appointed her treasurer too at the same time. On the LIRA board, my membership was expiring, a 3-year term, and we held a vote for that. There were 3 positions available. 2 incumbents were running, and then 3 other people, including Monica. who has been who was a member of the LIRA board before she joined Rails, and she was the director of the Schaumburg Library and served in that capacity on the LIRA board. But she had to resign the position. Well, she's back on again. So she was happy to announce that she was elected. I've also been active with the North Suburban Library Business Managers Network, and that's a very nice source to have exposure with our libraries and see what their issues are. And Sharon has picked up my affiliation with that group. We had our last meeting yesterday, or my last meeting yesterday. Later in the meeting, this meeting, we're going to ask that you designate Monica as the authorized agent, IMRF. That's a position that I had previously filled. The work is done mostly by other people who are appointed who can get onto authorized. What's the term, Sharon?
Authorized agent.
Pardon me?
Web assistant.
Web assistants. There will be one in finance and two in human resources to do the day-to-day work, but Monica will be overseeing that. When our budget was presented at last May's meeting, the board had a fair amount of concern that we had a $500,000 budget deficit. We said we would work on that. I mentioned the 2 grants that we received that could cut out to $160,000 of this. In the meantime, we also renegotiated the contract with Bibliolabs, and which will result in fiscal year 22 spending of $78,000 compared to a budgeted amount of $170,000. So it's almost $90,000 savings on that. Annual spending on that contract going forward will be $40,000 a year. So it'll be even a bigger savings in future years. We of a less big note, but it's still $12,000. I applied for a FEMA grant for our COVID-19 special expenditures in the year 2020. I worked quite a few months on this project, but probably put in about $10,000 of my time on it for a $13,000 request. It was after I cut the request off in September of 2020, and in May of 2021, I got a long memo on why it was denied. In September, we started getting indications that the FEMA was reviewing their criteria for these grants, and then I got an email and we had a call, but in a nutshell, they have revised their requirements so that if you initially, it was basically they assumed that we had closed down and we didn't really need to spend anything on an emergency basis. They revisited that for us and other libraries and decided those expenses were now eligible. And they're about ready to approve about $12,500. So someday we will get that money. Still some more steps to take, I guess, but nothing considerable on our part. So I'm glad we will at least recover my expenses and some others. And another thing the finance department is doing is we have a project to gradually transition to billing by email instead of paper invoice. That could, if we go, and it's in the pilot stages now, we're going to do a test run on the Prairie Cat clients, but we could save $1,100 or so a year in postage and nearly a week's time of Deborah's that can be better spent elsewhere. And my other roles as a chief contact for some various HR and finance vendors is also being transitioned. So I think we're moving along. I still have 6 more weeks to finalize a few other things, and but it's been a great ride.
Well, Jim, thank you again for that. and you listed an awful lot of the last, and we'll hear from you some more during
Okay.
the thing. Thank
We
you.
will.
Report from the Rails president. There are no committee reports as only subcommittees met since the last board meeting. Those reports will be included in the January board packet. With us via Zoom is Deidre is next with the Rails report.
Thanks, Tom. Everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Well, I'm afraid I have to also start by talking about Jim. I want to thank him. He's going to be around a while longer with Rails, thank goodness. But I did want to be able to speak to the board and to the members today just about what a great colleague and team player he has always been. He's done just a fabulous job with the finance department. He's a great boss. He's always been up for new projects. He just told you about a few. There was also the census grant that we worked on together. That was quite a project, but always committed to the mission of Rails, committed to the member libraries, and his whole department felt that way. And as you heard, he also stepped up to be part of Lyra and Limerick. I can't say enough good things about him. So thank you, Jim, on behalf of the staff. We're going to celebrate you some more as time goes on, but I did want to just say to the board how much you have meant to me as a colleague. So I'm giving you a round of applause I'm in New Jersey with my family today. So thank you so much, Jim. And I hope I'm embarrassing you. So, let's see. What I wanted to tell you was just to reiterate a few things from my report. We did have a great time at the ISLE conference. We had a lot of business at the Rails booth. It was really wonderful. Saw Beth there. Were you there, Monica? I'm not quite sure. Monica Tolva. No, you weren't there. It was a great conference. We were glad to see people in person. People were glad to see us, which is always also a nice feeling. And I did want to give you an update on the statewide databases. We did, Gail Bush did reach out to Senator Laura Murphy, and heard right back from her chief of staff saying, literally, your ears must have been burning, because I was just talking to the senator about getting this launched. So that, and I think the expansion of cards for kids will be are on track for being filed in January, as near as I can tell. So that is really all I have to add. Is there anything? I'm happy to answer any questions, of course.
No questions?
Right. That's not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I see Dan had a previous commitment this morning, and now Dan with his member engagement report.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And you all have my documents. The title of this is actually how Rails engages staff at all levels and all types of libraries. And that was kind of long, so I just shortened it to Rails member engagement, which is great because it's my title. I'm the member engagement manager. So when I like to talk about this, I kind of like to talk about what member engagement is, because it's a little bit of an amorphous term, I think. I kind of look at it as the intersection of 4 traditional areas of work. So it's part communications, it's part marketing, it's part onboarding and getting people kind of used to what we have to offer. And then there's also sort of a customer service aspect and receiving feedback from people. I come from the association world. I worked at the American Library Association before Rails. And member engagement is much different there because you're doing actual member recruitment, member retention. There's There's actual dollar figures in terms of your members associated with it. But, basically you're trying to create positive associations in people's minds with your organization. That's kind of the big challenge. And we certainly have a really big challenge here at Rails with that kind of thing, because, you understand the scope of our library system. Our library system is unlike any basically in the country. We're huge geographically. There are not only the 4 types of libraries, but if you take into account the fact that special libraries is just a catch-all term, right? You have 10, you maybe have 5 to 10 more categories of libraries. You could, you have huge range of budgets. I was just at a meeting of very small rural libraries, and they were talking about, issues with budgets, that type of thing. We did a study of our members in regards to the statewide database project, and we found that 20% of our budget, 20% of our members around that do not have any budget for purchasing new materials. And a lot of those are obviously school librarians. But how do you, like all of those different, challenges, how do you serve them, right? How do you address them? How do you connect with them? Another thing I was going to mention is we had a great meeting with the Massachusetts library system. I think that was last year in 2020, and they did some research on kind of their member needs and what their members see as the biggest benefit being part of a library system. And it was different for each type of library, obviously. So for the public libraries, it was interlibrary loan delivery, right? For the school libraries, it was they have a statewide database of materials. So, I think some of you who are participating in the strategic planning process are hearing some of these same things, right? You're hearing from members who are saying, I love delivery. I want delivery to be the thing that is most important to us. I love, deals and discounts. I want deals and discounts to be the most. So, we have to kind of be aware of that. And when we approach people, we kind of have to think, what is going to move the needle for this type of person? So, when thinking about that and kind of planning strategically, we have a few tools in our tool belt in order to approach those. So you have a document, and the 2 biggest, honestly, for a long time for us have been site visits and member networking. So site visits, when we're drawing up a strategy, one of the tools we always use is site visits. We love going into our member libraries. We love talking to them. And I want to note that I'm not the only person that does this. Monica does this, Deirdre does this, a bunch of other Rails staff members go and have a chance to talk individually with members and kind of, learn from them and learn about what their needs are. I've done a lot of them over the past 3 years. I've probably performed around, 150, 200 site visits at public libraries or all types of libraries, some of them at your libraries where you come from. So when we do these, we create an agenda. Sometimes we request, when the need is there. And we've kind of found that the optimal time to do a site visit is when there's a transition. So when there's a new public library director in there, or when a new school librarian comes in, or as part of like the new member kind of onboarding process. Member networking. So before member networking, or before COVID-19, site visits and member networking were kind of hand in hand. We would pick an area, a geographic area of our region, and we would go there. We would host a member networking event, and then we would do site visits all within a radius of 30, 40 miles, something like that. And we would do it over the course of a few days. Maybe we would do 7 or 8 site visits. Obviously, member networking is different these days. We're doing a lot of it on Zoom. But I really like it because it kind of has 3 great parts to it. One, it allows me to get to know a lot of people at once, at one time. You can't do that with an individual one-on-one site visit. 2, it allows the members to get to know each other and kind of network with each other, talk to each other. And then 3, it allows them to get to know Rails and kind of find out more about what Rails is doing. So when we do like online roundtables, I always try to pump up other parts. So like e-read or continuing education or, projects that we have going on. So it's hard to replicate the face-to-face networking online, but you see those numbers that I have in front of you. We get good attendance at those events, and there's a hunger for these. And frankly, we're able to just kind of shrink our world a little bit on Zoom, which is kind of nice. So I like to kind of consider Rails as platform, right? We are creating a place where people are coming together to learn more about their jobs. Topics are usually something that I've gotten off of our email lists or seems to be a hot topic around the region. So other engagement topics that or other ways that we engage our members, and these are a variety of things. So social media, we do contests, we do individual profiles every Thursday if you've never seen them before. We do the Rails Minute. Deirdre and I have our little 10 minutes of talking about Rails things. We do the member updates where those are a great way for members to come together and talk about what's happening. We offer a lot of benefits for our networking groups, Zoom licenses. They used to be able to meet in Rails facilities. We can give them email lists, things like that. We have a new project called the Specialized Library Spotlight. I just actually recorded our first video on Wednesday, which is a lot of fun. Very excited for that. We have a team of folks who are working on the My Library Is campaign, and those people come from all different types of libraries. They're giving advice, they're writing blog posts, they've come up with a lot of great ideas for the campaign, moving it in very new directions. The orientation video project, I'm not going to talk about that too much, but that's basically just an opportunity for us to kind of create training videos for people to get to learn difficult things like how do I get an L2 account, right? How do I navigate the Rails website? How do I get an email list? All those type of things. And then lastly, it's not on there, but we work as liaisons a lot of times to other organizations. And that's actually a big part of my role. So you probably all know the work that we've done with ISLE. We do monthly meetings. Monica leads monthly meetings with ISLE and now a bunch of other organizations around the state. We've been involved in working with ICRL, with hosting networking for them over the last couple of years, which has been a great partnership. And then I am the incoming SLA Illinois president, which has been a lot of fun, a little bit difficult, but I think it's really shown me the struggles that are happening in special libraries, and I know that's of interest to the board. But I will say, I think us as an organization, SLA Illinois, when I'm speaking, we've made a lot of progress. I feel like we've done all I think we really transitioned well in COVID-19 and the pandemic. We held our second annual SLA Midwest Symposium. Over 50 people attended this summer. It was a collaboration between SLA Indiana, SLA Iowa, SLA Michigan, and SLA Illinois. So I feel like we're really becoming sort of a Midwestern hub of special library thinking and ideas. And I'm really excited about next year when I'm actually president. And I feel like there's some really good things on the horizon for that organization. So I think that's where I'm going to hold it. Can I answer any questions or tell you more? All right. Well, thank you very much. Oh,
Dan, I think we're stunned at the amount of engagement.
that is the cake, right?
Two questions.
Sure.
Okay, how's the sleep coming?
Sleep's okay.
Okay.
I can't complain too much, actually. It's been okay.
And a lot of networking events, and we used to meet in person. The board is welcome to those events. I know I attended a bunch. Jay used to attend a bunch, and they're really good to meet other library people in the area and that. And I just thank you for that.
Yeah,
and,
of course.
And thank you for the report. It sounds like you've been the busiest person in the building.
Well, I don't know about that. Jim is certainly a very busy person. So, but I do want to say, I'm actually, this is actually one of my last days. I'm going to be resuming my paternity leave. I have a 2-month-old, and I'm going to be resuming my paternity leave in December. Jim, first of all, I want to say, wow, I just want to echo what everybody else has said. You are such a team player. You're such a good guy. You've done so much for Rails, and I'm really going to miss you, and I know a lot of people around the building are going to miss you. So, thank you.
But I don't have much sympathy for the sleep questions.
Yeah.
We started out with twins.
That's why I try not to complain, because I know a lot of people have had it a lot worse than I have. So, yeah. But thank you all for having me, and happy Friday. Good to see you all.
Thank you, Dan.
Greg, that's a tough act to follow. Now on to the Illinois State Library.
I don't even really want to follow that, but that's quite impressive. So. Congratulations, Dan. Anyway, but really, I too wanted to mention Jim, and I've reached out to him privately, but publicly. Jim has served Rails well. He and I have worked together for a long, long time, and even when I was doing other things here at the State Library, and truly appreciate what he's done for the library system there. So we wish you well and a long and healthy, happy retirement, Jim. So it's well deserved. Just a few things for updates. We know that we have a request from the library system regarding the L2 subcommittee that is being formed. We'll be meeting here Tuesday about that and getting a response back to you on who will be participating in that from the State Library. I do have an update as well regarding the GeoMark mapping project that we have contracted with Southern Illinois University to assist with, especially with the public library districts and census data or fulfillment of the public library per capita grant applications and for other purposes as well. So they've really completed that project. We viewed that once again. There were 8 libraries where the data that was being fed to the university and what the Department of Revenue had for service areas, it was conflicting. So we have reached out to those 8 libraries, and that is being resolved. So we should be having release of that quite soon. And I believe that the intent right now is for the university to prepare some webinars for instruction and how they compile this information. And it's been interesting to see what's been certified with the Secretary of State's Index Department for municipalities and how that's comparative to the data that they've compiled as well. And it is very, very close, very, very accurate. It was good to see those results. We're reviewing the school library grant applications for school per capita that we've received. Those announcements will be forthcoming in the next few weeks. Yes, we are pleased to see some payment progress out of the State Comptroller's Office again, and we do expect that to continue at least hopefully through the remainder of this fiscal year. So I think that's good news for all grant recipients from the State Library. Of course, we continue. We've now, we released grant awards for the ARPA grant funding that the State Library received through IMLS. And we're now actually processing payments for those too. So that is moving forward quite well. We're following along with representatives from each of the library systems and the Library Association on what the infrastructure packages and implementation of broadband may mean for public libraries in the state. So there's much more work that will be conducted on that initiative too. And again, both of the library systems have representatives to that working group too. So really, this is, I would like to say this is a quiet time. It's really not. We're now beginning, what does FY23 look like as far as budget, moving into the legislative session and all of the questions that arise with that. So we will just be following along and see what develops. So questions from everyone, and happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Any questions for Greg? Greg, thank you very much. And next up is new business. 9.1, 6-month review of closed session minutes. The board received via email the closed session minutes for May 22, August 28th, May 28th. That was in year 2 in 2020. In 2021, May 28th and July 30th. Is there any discussion regarding these closed minutes? No discussion?
This
Need a
is Scott.
motion?
Oh, I was gonna say, Tom, this is Scott. I'll make a motion to release the minutes of May 22nd and May 28th, 2021, and keep the rest of those minutes closed as the need for confidentiality still exists for those minutes.
This is Becky. I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Becky. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion carries. Jim, you're back on center stage.
As I mentioned in my little transition speech, one of the functions I was serving was as the authorized agent to the Municipal Retirement Fund. This is an oversight type thing, and we have people who are appointed that do the day-to-day work, but this position gets a lot of correspondence from IMRF and allows that person to keep tabs of what's going on. And we are requesting that Monica take over this role and prepare the resolution and paperwork to do that. So we are just asking for the board's approval of this resolution.
Thank you, Jim. May I have a motion and second for the appointment of Monica Harris as the IMRF authorized agent for Rails?
So moved, Alex.
Alex, thank you, Alex.
Karen.
Excuse me?
Second.
Second, Karen? Okay, Karen, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries. Back to Jim again. This is like Jim's meeting here. Review of Rails depositories.
Our fiscal accountability policy, which many of you probably aren't too familiar with, has a stipulation that the Rails boards periodically review the depositories that we work with. And we haven't done this for a while, and I thought it's a good time to do that. We are currently working with PMA, which stands for Prudent Man Advisors, with DMO Harris as their depository. The Wintrust primarily through the Hinsdale Bank and Trust Company and Illinois Funds. We have $4 million on deposit with Illinois Funds, which is a money market fund, which is currently paying like 0.02%. We have a significant amount of funds in the Wintrust money market account, and then a lesser in the checking account, just enough to cover our checks. And with PMA in the past, we have participated in their CDARS program, in which they find certificates of deposit, and they invest in a number of them, all under the just under the 250,000 FDIC insurance limit. We haven't participated in that in quite a few years as the rates sunk, and we didn't see any benefit to doing that. But we are contemplating now that we would like to invest in some of their newer products, which is, let's see, their PMA's fixed investment income program and their limited term duration series. And basically what we would do is stagger our 4 million or so from Illinois funds into a series of 6-month, 12-month, 18-month, 2-year investments that would come due at those times. So we would get the advantage of currently a little bit higher rates, which are not that higher anymore. The going out, let's see. For example, the 2-year rate, the last we got was like 0.4%, 3 years, 0.65%. 3.5.9%. But we could lock, but that's a lot higher than 0.02%. But in other years, our money market account, the average in 2018 was 1.35%. 2019, it was 2.3%. 2020 was 1.5%. And in those years, we got investment income ranging from 181,000 to 335,000. So the money market accounts, can rise quite quickly. And then so what could happen is that we're in a 0.4% 2-year rate, and we see money markets go to 2% in that time. So you look kind of dumb that way. But if the rates stay the same, you look pretty smart. So it's we thought we will do a little experimenting and put at least some of this money, mostly which is held in Illinois funds, which we haven't touched in years, in this type of account and see how we like it. So what we're asking on this resolution is to reapprove, or not approve, but recognize that we have PMA, Wintrust, and Illinois funds as our current depositories. And we have 2 other banks that are currently listed as depositories. They are MB Financial and the private bank, and we haven't used them in years. MB Financial was used as a special non-interest bearing account, which we don't need anymore with the Talking Books program. Private bank, we invested in very short-term CDs, and we can do that through PMA. So we're asking that we reapprove the 3 banks we're currently using, the 3 institutions we're currently using, and drop private bank and MB Financial from the list. I answer any questions with that.
Okay.
And we'll see how it works.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Oh, one thing I did for calendar year 22, the general feeling and what the Federal Reserve has talked about is increasing interest rates as many as 2 times. The first being in June is what's currently expected. It doesn't mean that will happen, but the pressures are building. The inflation rate is the highest in 30 years now at over 6%. And the economy is very strong. So it could be sooner, and we could see movement. Nobody has been really good at predicting such events. I would be doing something else if I could.
The crystal ball isn't so clear right now.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions for Jim? Okay, thank you, Jim. May I have a motion and second for the approval of PMA with Harris North America, Wintrust Banks, primarily Hinsdale Bank and Trust, and Illinois funds as depository of Rails funds, with approval to invest in any of their product offerings, and the removal of the private bank and MB Financial as Rail depositories.
So moved. This is Scott.
Scott, thank you. Diane, second. Thank you, Diane. Emily, will you please call roll?
Sure. Ally Cox.
Yes.
Alice Creason.
Yes.
Robin Hellenthal.
Yes.
Diane Hollister. Chris Kenny.
Yes.
Jennifer McIntosh.
Yes.
Scott Poynton.
Yes.
Patricia Smith.
Yes.
Becky Sprattford.
Yes.
Beth Keppen.
Yes.
Monica Tolva.
Yes.
Alex Vancina.
Yes.
Karen Wojcik.
Yes.
Thomas Stack.
Yes. Monica, you are up now for unfinished bit, the strategic planning update.
Thank you, Tom. Just before we get started, I know we have a lot to cover today, but I did want to just again be another person to add to the choir to thank Jim for everything that he has done at Rails here. When I joined Rails, I came from a district library background and the finances are quite different. At Rails, he's always been very patient and kind about having ways to explain things so that people understand. And one of the biggest things that we have heard from staff people is how his door is always open, and there was always the opportunity for people to come to him and ask questions without feeling like they should already know the answer. So he will be very missed at Rails, and he is very much appreciated. And I know you all know that, but we want to all have the opportunity to say it. So thank you. So I did want to share with you all just some things about the strategic planning process. You all saw the memo that was in your board packet, which really showed you what a busy month we've had. So there's been a lot of meetings and a lot of interviews and updates, which Cindy and Stephanie will share with you in just a moment. I did want to thank so many of the board members that we saw in our strategic planning town hall meetings, and for all of your feedback that you've given throughout this process. It has really resulted in what I think is a very robust and strong process so far. And I know we're very excited to share more about that process today. So I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie and Cindy, who are on the call. Hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us back. My name's Stephanie, and Cindy, I saw she's here, so I'll let her pop on and say hi as well.
Hi.
And then let me bring up my screen. We just have a short slide deck to share with you. If I can bring up the right window. And there, hopefully all of you can see this, the Rails strategic plan checking in. So again, we're here just to give you a brief update of where we are with the process. So we're going to start just by going right into some notes. We shared some, we, I think, met again last time, right after we had done some engagement. So just some high level things that we had really noticed about just the representation at our engagements. So as really not a surprise, the majority of the participants really represented public libraries and were directors or upper management. So just something to note, it's not that that's good or bad, it's just something to note, that our special and our academic libraries were the least represented in terms of those who were present, and that our school libraries were least represented in terms of overall percentage of potential participants. We did try to mitigate this through personal invitations and reach out to Rails staff were really important here, and also about the times that we chose to do some engagements. We very particularly chose some late afternoon post-school time engagements for our school librarians. So we're making the effort. Cindy's going to go into some more detail about some of what she discovered, especially in the interviews and the focus groups that she did. But I think what is really a key takeaway is that at every moment, Rails was really praised for its leadership. So member library staff are eager to share how influential and important Rails is to them, and the work that Rails really did through the pandemic, specifically around Realm and just about helping people stay on top of what was happening with COVID safety protocols and procedures, was mentioned as a very pertinent, very recent example. So Rails is just really recognized as having a strong voice. And what they would really like to see is for Rails to continue to capitalize on that. So to continue to really continue in and expand on that very visible leadership role, and to make sure we're really capitalizing on what small and solo libraries really brought up is the efficiency that Rails can really highlight for them. And then members here do see Rails as one of the most effective tools for advocacy and communication, and they want to see Rails take on a stronger role. And you'll see we'll briefly touch on the goals and the objectives that have come out of this process, and you'll see how that might look. So Cindy.
Thanks. Just took me a second to unmute there. So as Stephanie mentioned, I got to have sort of deeper conversations with members via focus groups and with individuals via one-on-one interviews. So although thinking about goals and objectives, like Stephanie said, we're going to get to that in a moment, there's a lot of very specific input that we've shared with Monica and Dee about people's ideas for moving forward. That said, it is our job to take that very specific input and turn it into something that is generally recognizable as an overview. So that's what we're going to look at now, is just some of those big themes that came out of the interviews and the focus groups. And I'll just say, as a reminder, the interviews were with Leslie Bednar of Heartland, Greg, who's on the call, Diane Foote with ILA, and Craig with Carly. And the focus groups were with representatives from special libraries, academic libraries, school libraries, the Planning Steering Committee, and you all on the board. So that's who I talked to. Let me tell you what I heard, just to echo what Stephanie said about the deep appreciation that's out there for Rails. Members most appreciate delivery service. It comes up in every conversation that I've had. As a close second, they really appreciate Rails as connector. So it's exciting to hear where the mission statement is evolving into, given what I was hearing at the same time that Stephanie was helping craft that. They adore the shared resources, but I have to say I didn't hear a lot about specific databases or specific resources. The specifics I did hear about were the professional development that's available, either provided by Rails or just spreading the word about something else that's available. Job listings came up a number of times, either placing them or looking for a new job through them, and then the buying power of sharing resources. And very excited to say that Rails staff members were mentioned very often as just being incredibly valuable to members. So I'll talk for just a moment then too about the desired result. I'm sort of skipping to the end, and we'll keep the middle in a moment. People are very interested in seeing more people of color represented in Rails and in libraries themselves. So equity, diversity, and inclusion, it is on people's minds within the profession, within the organization of Rails. Rails is also interested in a different kind of equity, and that is equity between different kinds of libraries, different types, specials, K-12s, different sizes, different geographical locations. So I heard equity come through as both equity, diversity, and inclusion as we would typically think about it with BIPOC populations, but it also came through as sort of equity in how member libraries are perceived. Next slide, please, Stephanie. And then this is where we really get down to it. Some of the big opportunities that emerged, and opportunities are defined more as sort of things that Rails is doing that they can do more, or change tack, or a new, relatively easy to achieve option that might be emerging in the future. So really, I would say the theme to the opportunities that were discussed in focus groups and interviews was fostering community and collaboration. And so those are very broad. Some of the specifics that came onto it is really kind of personal feelings, with people wanting to feel connected to Rails. And so they want to feel part of a community. They also want to be connected to their other membership within Rails. So I know those of you, many of you who work in libraries can sort of feel how you're working in an island adrift and not connected to too many people when you're at work, and that feeling is definitely out there. So that's an interesting opportunity for Rails to just continue to do the fantastic work that it's doing to connect folks. On a personal level, the members, the people who represent the member organizations, they want to feel valued and understood, and they want their particular kind of library to feel valued and understood by the rest of membership. So for example, special libraries would say, we want public libraries to understand what it is to be a special library. And I heard this repeated from the different kinds of library types that I spoke with. They just felt that their message wasn't being heard. Again, just an opportunity to communicate and share. Again, delivery comes up. It came up specifically in this fostering community way because the delivery drivers are the one personal touch a day that many of the organizations get from Rails itself. So just being aware that those delivery drivers are part of the outward facing face of Rails and walk into libraries on a regular basis. And then the collaborate is more about collaborating with like organizations, and specifically what came up the most was Heartland and then the State Library. So hi, Greg. Communication, collaboration on a statewide basis as well came up, and people get that there are two different library systems. They get that the state library serves both. And there's an interest in looking to see what economies of scale can be found with the two systems collaborating with the state library, helping to leverage resources to support joint statewide programs. So the aspirational work, I have many more details that have been shared with Monica and Dee, but the overview view is that they would really just like Rails to continue to lead in resource collaboration. And here's where it gets a little lofty. Heard over and over that it's time for universal services to be taken seriously. So a recommendation that's semi-realistic and not completely blue sky is to just start laying the groundwork for that, whatever that looks like. And we haven't figured that out yet, but it was heard a lot that people want service to be equitable regardless of where you live, basically. And then the other thing is to collaborate on e-resources across library types. So if a database is contracted for to serve public libraries, could it also serve libraries of all types? And one thing I didn't put in here, but I did hear a lot is member organizations would very much like these resources to be free. When they say free, they mean free to them, obviously not free to Rails, not free to the state library, whoever's paying for it, but they would like to be able to offer across Rails, if not across the entire state, a comprehensive suite of databases that their organization itself doesn't need to pay for because somebody, the state, has it covered. So those are the big takeaways for my stuff. On the next slide, I'll share just some of the quotes that really stood out to me. So whatever we can do as a profession in this state to promote the sharing of resources is really important, just encapsulates what I heard over and over, with sharing meaning different things, either just within Rails, just within publics, across the state, whatever it was. One interesting thing I heard is that systems are best when you don't know they're there. And I understand that. You don't want the machinery behind the product to make itself known. And some folks look at Rails as that machinery, I guess. So that was an interesting and different take than your previous strategic plan, for example. And here's where the equity, diversity, and inclusion is really a fine point is made when somebody said diversity is really important. Members are struggling to find people of color to hire to counter this. I will say seeing BIPOC representation on Rails committees, board, that kind of thing is also very important to people. None of this is new to anybody. We know this and we all commonly struggle. There was lots of excitement around busting silos, and that is regardless of whether you work in a K-12 library, a special library, that you have equal access to the resources that Rails brings to its membership. And the last thing that I want Rails staff especially to hear is that people consider Rails member support very valuable and very valued. So in the field, you are valued and seen as a valuable part of the show that they put on every day for their patrons. That's me.
Thanks, Cindy. So for those of you who are able to be part of our second round of town halls, you'll notice that some of this is getting, very detailed. It's very individual, very individual member library or individual person focused. And so what we really tried to do in that second round of town halls was really tap into people's expectations. And so you'll see the result of that work. We're bringing that work to the Strategic Plan Steering Committee next to really help further shape the goals and objectives that you're going to see. But some of what we really tried to communicate in that setting, where without fail, each goal, people really viewed the key measurement of success for Rails as having a very long-term benefit. So that Rails, the investment that Rails makes now in these areas, in this work, that it will benefit the greater whole and will benefit long-term. So some of the challenge that we really have, of course, is to balance, like this is in their heart of heart, right? In their heart of hearts, this is what they want. They recognize the role that Rails really plays across these large geographic area, many different types of members. They want to see that be long-term, but they also are in these moments express this real need, as Cindy pointed out, for like individual validation, individual results. So some of what we are trying to do through our process is to continue to keep people rolling up and thinking about the work that Rails can do that benefits the collaborative, the collective whole, and that people have said that that is more important to them than the individual immediate short-term benefit. So just trying to provide you with some of those tools as the plan rolls forward. So we do want to share, again, one of the things that we were asked to do was to look at Rail's current mission statement. And we worked with the Strategic Planning Steering Committee to do that. There are several members, of course, of the board on that group. And we worked through a process to come up collaboratively with a mission statement that's really rooted in story and in impact. So the mission statement that we bring to you as a draft is "We connect libraries." And I'll let Dee and Monica, if they want to speak a little bit to this, I want to make sure to give them space. But as Cindy pointed out, that connection was really viewed as so important. And we think that this statement really highlights, again, that leadership, but also that partnership that Rails really seeks to have with the libraries that are their members. So Dee or Monica, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
Well, I would first like to say that the genesis of this started at the board meeting, the last board meeting where you all talked about it, and somebody said either this or Rails connects us. And I just love them both because they're so true, so authentic, and straightforward. There's not a lot of there's no commas, there's no complex sentences. It's really clear what we do. And I think, the fact that the word libraries is in there is very important. And I think it just really, there's no doubt that we could, go on for, more sentences, but I don't think we need to. I think just says it all. And like I say, the fact that we've heard this over and over, the connection from members, you guys, it's like, I love it. I hope you do too.
Great.
So we got a lot of positive feedback from the steering committee about these concepts, and really, again, talking about the strength. I think like Dee just highlighted the strength and its succinctness, so that how powerful a statement can be. And if we think about a mission statement as really being, what an organization can really uniquely provide, like what is the space that it is uniquely able to sit in to do the work that it does. I feel like this statement really, again, very firmly places Rails in that connection, that web, that partnership that comes up so importantly. So I'll look at the goals and the objectives, and then I think I know that we have a limited amount of time, so I'll leave our questions for the end, and we can touch on all of these things. So I do want to share the potential goals that really have come out of this. So one of the key directives that we have, one of the things that's really been invested in all of the elements of our planning process, is to really allow member libraries to take a lead. So these goals were strongly shaped by member input. In some case, I think there's language that is directly from member libraries and from our strategic planning committee in the goals. So we have 4 goals. The first 2 potential goals being that Rails leads alongside member libraries to develop and strengthen the Illinois library community. This came from our steering committee. So again, highlighting that leadership and that partnership, as well as echoing, again, that importance of being at the level where we're seeking to benefit members as a collective. The second potential goal, Rails supports member libraries in preparing for their future. There was a real interest in, as we did analysis on opportunities and past input, to really looking to Rails to help libraries be ready for what's next. And you'll see there's some specific ideas for what that looks like in the objectives. The third, the Rails provides leadership in ensuring sustainable, equitable resource sharing across member library types. So looking here, again, at that resource sharing role that you play, echoing that leadership position, really wanting to make sure that what what we as Rails are providing is sustainable, and that can have multiple meanings of the words, and equitable. So as opposed to thinking about equal, where every library of every type, of every size, and every area is having access to exactly the same member menu of services, really thinking about making commitment over this plan to dig a little bit deeper, to learn a little bit more about our members and how to provide services that are most meaningful for them. And then the last, you can see echoing what Cindy brought up that came up very loud and clear through those engagement sessions. Rails models best practices in equity, diversity, and inclusion for member libraries. So really, again, thinking about how important it is to be visible, and how member libraries are really looking to Rails to do some of the work and show them what it looks like. So many of your libraries are coming from local municipalities that may be not offering this type of support or don't have access to training, are unsure of how to start this work themselves, really looking for Rails to help provide that. And so then under each goal is a set of objectives, and these get a little bit more specific about how Rails is really going to do the work that it needs to do. So if we look at that first one, 3 potential objective areas include, again, that Rails will seek to understand member perceptions of equitable service in order to better support academic, special, and school libraries. So really calling out the 3 groups that say, we want you to know more about us, what can we access? But really, again, working with members to better understand what their needs are. Rails will continue to strengthen collaborative relationships with partner library organizations, and very specifically mentioning the Heartland system and the state library. And then one that we'll be looking with our strategic planning committee to really further develop is an internally, and with Rails staff, an internally focused objective that's really about keeping Rails strong, capitalizing and building on the work from the previous strategic plan that really emphasized the organizational excellence of Rails. In that second goal about Rails supporting member libraries and preparing for their future, really you can see how this has some specific areas that members are really interested in. So an advocacy related objective, again, we'll work on the language of this with our strategic planning committee, that really touches on the importance of adequate funding in modern buildings. So members had a lot of requests for advocacy on the part of Rails, again, using that big voice, the effectiveness they view of that voice, but really asking for help. How do we talk to our local agencies about what adequate funding looks like? How do we talk to our local agencies and get help around modernizing our buildings? So not that Rails would be responsible for the funding or leading a building plan. It's about how, again, making use of that efficiency to help member libraries have messaging, learning, access to resources that could help them in this area. Very particularly in the professional development efforts, which we know are really highly valued, that they take a distinctly future focus aspect. So crossing library types while also being specific to individual library type needs. That we support libraries and helping their communities participate effectively in the digital environment, and or support member library staff in learning technology skills and emerging technology. So there was a real request to have, again, that efficiency of support in learning more about what's happening. Member libraries of all types, or I should say really of all types, schools, academic and public. One of the things that really has resonated for them from the pandemic is seeing the gap in access to technology and skills that their communities that they serve, their students they serve have. How could Rails help them better meet this significant need? In the third goal, where Rails is ensuring leadership in providing sustainable, equitable resource sharing, again, really looking to continue the review of delivery services, really finding ways to learn from this very successful program. So again, thinking about the feelings that people have, the efficiencies that can be found in this system, and how do we really take advantage of that to create internal capacity for member libraries and for Rails itself. And then learning again from the success of delivery, how do we explore additional collaborative resource models? And some examples are deals for discounts, a potential expansion of Find More Illinois, and continued advocacy for statewide databases. So 3 areas directly coming to you from your members. And then to grow resource sharing opportunities through member networks and communications. So again, emphasizing that connection, the belonging that member libraries want to have, but the power also of working together. And then I noticed here where I caught it on my first slide, but not on my second slide, you can see an example of how language went through tweaks when we went to our member libraries. So from member libraries and staff, a request to really have some real direct language. So you can see we took out the seeks to, and so Rails will model best practices in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so you'll see again in partnership with Rails members, really exploring opportunities to diversify Illinois Library Board and staff. So again, recognizing Rails is not going to solve this problem. It is part of helping people find a solution. Rails will increase the availability of equity, diversity, and inclusion focused training and professional development. Again, recognizing this is a big request for people and helping them move from learning to action. And then an internally focused one, again, really modeling those practices where Rails will examine aspects of Rails policies, procedures, and core services through an equity lens and make needed improvements. And so we've gone through a lot of information very quickly, and I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment. But I know after the meeting, Monica can provide you with links to the open documents that we've had to collect input on these 4 areas. You're welcome to share your input as well, or just look at what member libraries have really contributed. For next steps, we'll be bringing the concepts from this to our strategic planning committee. So Tom and Scott, who are there to represent you, will have a very strong role in determining how well we really feel these fit. If we really think that they're meeting the expectations that members have, which again, we just spent our second round of town hall really trying to dig in to what those expectations are. So then we come back with a plan. It is going in the direction that members expect you to go in, while also still being really important and useful to you as an organization, as a tool for leadership and future work. So I know it's a quick overview. You'll have plenty of time to review after, but I'm open, Cindy and I are open for any questions, and then we'll be continuing to work.
Any questions for Stephanie and Cindy? I did want to take this opportunity to really thank Cindy and Stephanie, especially in this stretch this month. They have really been working hard for Rails, sometimes doing 2 town hall meetings and a staff meeting in a day. So we really appreciate what they have come up with, and we think it's been a really exciting process, and we hope you appreciate what's coming out of it.
And also the tools that they use to facilitate all this are really, really cutting edge. And thank you very much, Cindy and Stephanie, for that.
I have one question. So the mission statement is great, very succinct. I'm wondering if we're planning on developing a vision statement that accompanies it, that, I mean, maybe gives some sense of what we mean by connecting. Is that in the plans or not?
I was thinking about that too. That's you, Jennifer, right? Did you say that?
Yes, it is. Sorry if I didn't hear myself.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't say that originally because I had just said, you know, I really don't like our mission statement. I think the vision statement is better, but there's no reason to not look at it. So, yeah.
So some of what we can do with the strategic planning steering committee is look at the vision statement. Vision statement generally, you know, we want them to be aspirational, and the tip I often give is that your vision statement should almost not quite ever be able to be realized. So you're always working toward it. So we can, as part of that work with the strategic planning committee, kind of look at that flow. What is the vision that we have? What are we as Rails contributing to it uniquely? Are these things that we are saying moving our mission and our, you know, forward closer to realizing that vision? So we can really make sure that we give plenty of time for the steering committee to look at that.
Anything else?
We're set.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cindy and Stephanie and Monica. And now for
Jennifer McIntosh and her report on academic libraries. I had the opportunity to visit the College of DuPage Library 13 weeks ago, because that's how many weeks my class has been going. It's a great library. Yeah.
It is a great library. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Okay, I suppose I need to share my video. Even though I'm here, I'm online also, which is kind of very meta. I'm here, I'm there. Thank you for this opportunity to have another opportunity. It was just less than a year ago that, that Sarah and I were speaking about academic libraries, but I think there's just a lot to discuss. So it's nice to have another opportunity. And I want to thank you again for presenting a lot of ideas to potentially include in this presentation. There was probably more than really, frankly, fits in one presentation. And I think one topic, particularly open educational resources, I think really needs a separate discussion. So I've already talked to a colleague who'd be willing to come and speak on that, and we can kind of look at what's appropriate in terms of the kind of information you might be interested in. So we can address that one at another time. I'm gonna go ahead to share my browser. Can you see my screen? Yes, you can. Excellent. Okay, excellent. Okay, so here we are. So like I said, I took the ideas that you had given me, and I was also just trying to kind of be inspired by the things that are called the conversations that are ongoing right now among my colleagues. And this is kind of what I pulled together from that. I had the opportunity to go to the Carly annual meeting just a couple of weeks ago, and there was a really meaningful discussion there that while I was in the middle of it, I thought, oh my gosh, this would really encapsulate what the conversation among academic libraries really looks like right now. So a good chunk of what I want to share with you actually are the ideas that really came up from the people who were in attendance at that meeting, because it was just a really rich discussion. So I kind of structured my notes on that conversation. And then I kind of took some of the other ideas you had from for this presentation, put them in the buckets of relationships with public libraries and relationships with schools. There was the questions about what reciprocal borrowing looks like. And then the adjacent piece to that is just what does a community borrower look like in academic libraries? And then the idea of dual credit support is one very narrow topic of how schools and academic libraries potentially touch each other. And so I think there's probably a lot of other things we would maybe want to discuss around that in the future. But I'm going to try to just kind of map out these topics particularly, and then some ideas that some things that really struck me, obstacles that are I think that limit our ability to build some of these relationships that I think might be interesting to consider. And I'll have a few suggestions that popped into my head as I was completing some of my research. So that Carly annual meeting, you know, it starts off with a nice keynote address, and then we had a deeper discussion about an ongoing assessment project that we've been supporting for a couple of years, and then additional information about the work that's being done at the state level around OER. So those were kind of like the big planks of the day. What I want to focus in on is the conversation that accompanied the keynote address, and it was delivered by Emily Knox from the U of I. And she is, you know, integral in developing the LIS curriculum there. And so she was talking about how the curriculum for LIS students is changing in response to all the things that we've seen in the past couple of years. They're always obviously looking to be responsive. And the question that she really wanted us to contemplate after that was, you know, what does an LIS student need to be prepared to be successful in an academic library? And what that prompted was a conversation that I think reflects not only key things that everybody is working on and thinking about, but what's the stuff that I'm having to deal with right now that you may not have learned in library school or might not occur to you initially, but also where are the deficits? Like, wow, if I was going to hire somebody next, what would I wish they would be able to bring to the staff, right? So it's what kind of surfaced is both. It's what we do now, but what we wish we could do more of, I think is really kind of how I capture the thoughts there. And I took all of our notes and I put them into these buckets. This is kind of how I broke down everybody's thoughts from that day. You know, some of these topics, I think at a topic level, all of it looks fairly what you might expect, right? But I'm going to drill down a little deeper into these. You know, like I said, the stuff that you might really expect would surface around management and leadership. I think building our capacity in that area is something everybody recognized. And I think it's universal to all libraries, though. I mean, I look at this list and I say, I can't think of a library that wouldn't want to have staff that have these skills, right? So not just the work of managing budgets, but really having the tools to advocate for additional resources, strategies that work. And and related point on policies, there was just such a sense of where we need to develop new policies, but there's just so much change and so much fluidity. What does policymaking look like when you're not really sure what 6 months or 12 months looks like? It's difficult to make confident decisions about policy. So, you know, these are skills that we wish people could bring to the table, right? We got into some of the more nuts and bolts stuff, like, boy, I never thought I'd ever need to be this knowledgeable about, you know, toner cartridges or things like the mundane parts of maintaining technology, but on the other end, being knowledgeable about networking and all sorts of things that also seem way outside the job you might have intended, along with, you know, everyone just started sharing horror stories about mice and snakes and leaks and like, oh my gosh, all the things about being a facilities manager that truly you might have thought it would be part of your job, but you never imagined to the degree that ends up being, or ends up consuming your time, right? Because that ends up taking up way more bandwidth than you ever anticipated. I'll bring my slide, I can't see it. And then, you know, developing our capacity for communication, being persuasive, really recognizing how group dynamics are at the heart of what we do in our work with the people we serve, but also their institutions and then our organizations, like understanding, really having a deep knowledge of communications is something they identified as really valuable. And then just that constant drumbeat of being able to demonstrate value is just kind of this undercurrent, right? So things that are more specific, and I wanted to give you some more nuts and bolts stuff that probably doesn't surface in a meeting like this, but the stuff that's really on academic librarians' minds are, you know, we really need to be able to understand the nuances about different kinds of academic libraries. People say, I want to be an academic librarian, but they have no real specific understanding of what that looks like in different places. So understanding the positions, understanding the types of libraries. You know, we wish people had a better understanding of the broader arcs of how public education is developed, how higher ed looks, and future of that. So, you know, people who are in a master's or doctoral program, they're getting that education, but, you know, that's a small sliver of the people who are really practicing, right? A lot of things around understanding how to work with unions and understanding the faculty tenure process. There's so much logistics around just higher education as its own system that, again, are outside the scope of just libraries specifically, right? So the more people are prepared in that space, they feel they'll be more successful. Connecting. There are themes that you're going to see come up in here that resonate very strongly with what we were just seeing. This is just one of the first ones you'll see, but understanding how to connect with people. I mean, this is just a common theme we see all the time, but I think so much of our work in higher ed is based on relationships. You know, particularly the liaison model of working with a department, or, you know, having to work through a division office with a dean or something like that. There's just a lot of politics. There's a lot of interpersonal communication skills that come with that, and understanding your organization. Being able to work with other departments on campus. There's just so much, we're not an island, we're very much part of a larger system. So you have to have a really deep understanding of how those other departments support your goals and how to really make them an extension of your team, thinking big when you have to. And then understanding the value of committee work across the organization early on. We need people in this profession that understand the diversity of students, understand demographics about them. You know, most institutions are spending time educating their employees about this stuff, but I think we're hoping, you know, that people will start coming into the profession with a deeper awareness of how important it is to know the people we're serving, through that lens of like a demographic lens. Mental health was mentioned a number of times, building our capacity to support students and be a part of the social network on campus that ensures that mental health is supported and kept in check, because we're many times the place that's open last at night or the only one that's open on the weekend. There's just, we operate at the perimeters of the schedule many times, which makes us a key member of that team. Understanding how, students, their understanding of information and searching is evolving. So we're just like hoping, okay, please come in with maybe a more refined knowledge of what, what are today's students looking like? How are young, and maybe you'll have a better sense of, like, you were a student like 6 months ago, so you maybe understand this a little bit better, right? One member did identify that students were actually even acknowledging that they had deficiencies in digital literacy, though. I mean, I think that was just interesting that students were saying, I am seriously behind in some ways. So, understanding the students' deficiencies, having a good connection with what they need at that kind of basic level that informs instruction. Instruction has actually changed so much, I think, because of the pandemic, was already on that path. But we're having to kind of rebuild the way we think about instruction in so many ways at a very basic level. So, people who have the energy and the insight, the training to come in and look at how we deliver instruction and kind of reimagine what it needs to look like moving forward. Comfort in teaching outside your own area of expertise is something that we've challenged with quite a bit in academics. And the ubiquitous one-shot library instruction always challenges us with, how do you be an effective teacher when you have this one-time relationship to build, right? I think we're not the only ones struggling with that, but it's definitely core. Just assessment in general about, understanding the organization, understanding learning outcomes, all of that becomes so critical to how we function within the organization. And there was a couple of specific mentions of the need to understand how to deliver or how to execute a diversity audit in academic collections, which is very different than it would look in a public library setting. So it's something I definitely have talked about with my colleagues at COD too, is like, we need to talk about this, but we need to develop our capacity to understand what that looks like in academic collections. The bigger world is a scholarly communication and publishing, and a lot of faculty librarians have to have pretty savvy knowledge of the implications of what we purchase and how we purchase it, because we're looking at breaking up big packages and going with individual licensing, and then it impacts discovery, and all these things are all connected. Very complex system, and there's implications around privacy and ethics and all these things that we want to be mindful of. And building relationships in the publishing community, also just a big piece of what we're doing. So community engagement, this is where we start getting maybe into, this is actually my last plank of this. It was mentioned that we need to be understanding how we can connect with partners and build relationships and be a force for community organizing. I would say that was a minority part of the conversation, though. And I think that that's kind of interesting, but maybe not surprising that we're hyper-focused on the realities of our specific library type, right? The issues, a lot of the stuff is a lot of it's very specific to academic libraries. So there's a little bit of a barrier right there in terms of what is consuming the minds of academic librarians, the topics that they might want to engage with public libraries or school libraries on, they're narrow and limited compared to the broad range of things that are on their minds. So I don't think that's unique. Again, I think every library has the things that are most present in their mind, and it may not be the things that we share with other libraries. So I thought that was kind of worthy of note. But I do get the sense that there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm for this to happen, but it's I think harder to conceptualize where it would come from. Okay, so there were some questions about like how the impact of just like a shift to more digital based services and collections, how that's really kind of impacted academic libraries. And I think one thing that came out of that conversation was how we feel like there really is kind of a shift in identity emerging from this as we become more digital first. I mean, you're still a place, you're still physical resources, you're still connections with humans face to face. But I can honestly say from my own experience that when I think about our service infrastructure in my library, I'm thinking about our chat and virtual services at the center, and the in-person services are more satellite. It's not that we're not staffing them, but I have to have the virtual services in order. If the online collections aren't in place, if they aren't up and running, if chat isn't staffed, if the form is broken, like these are critical failures, right? They're not side issues to be dealt with when you can get to it. So I think that is a shift, and it has implications for how we advocate for resources in terms of space and technology on site. It changes everything we would, how do you advocate for retaining the space you have if you become more of a digital first operation? Are you willing to concede that I don't need as much space to do this? Or do you say, no, my mission for in-person services looks different now. It has a, it isn't about transactional. It's more about providing space for students to do what they need to do, and we're just adjacent to that. It's a kind of an identity shift, and I think it cuts to the core of what a lot of us maybe came up through the profession and imagining what our work would look like. So I think identity is core. Investing in digital collections. Many of us were fortunate to have a lot of resources in place in that space. Others not as much. So they had to think about the challenges of the last couple of years in different ways. And I'm going to show you some examples of things that have been done collaboratively to actually help that transition. In general, we felt that as a part of the academic community, the librarians and the library in general was more resilient and ready to handle a transition to digital. We were already using video conferencing technology. We already had some virtual services in place in most libraries. We had that capacity to just kind of step it up where other departments on campus had to really scramble. But I think collections, though, is probably an area where it needs money. You can't just train everybody up. You have to be able to write a check first if you want that ebook collection, right? So a couple of great examples of things that have happened in the last couple of years are that Carly last year led an effort to crowdfund an acquisition of ebook collections for all member libraries. And so, not all members were able to contribute, but all members benefited from having access to the collection. So we were given, as you may have seen in other crowdfunding campaigns, given like a suggested amount to donate based on your library size, with the option to obviously contribute whatever you want, and hopefully it would be enough to sustain the purchase. And we were able to do that. We were able to acquire quite a few books from major academic publishers, Wiley, Oxford, and the University Press scholarships. So that material became available to all members. It was immediately loaded, and available through iShare, so members could have the MARC records are all there. Everything's ready to go. They had assured that the licensing rights allowed for downloads and used as course materials. And so all those academic boxes were checked. So you can use these as much as you need to support curriculum. And then because it was successful, we've got another round going for this next year, doing the same thing, looking for sustained funding from a crowdsourced model. So that was the first time that I'm aware of that Carly hosted a crowdsourced model. I think it's something probably needs to be considered more broadly. I know other consortia do offer a crowdfunding model with a lot of projects. So I think it's a way to maybe expand access to a really broad range of libraries who don't have any budget at all. They're not going to be able to contribute, but rising tides, lifting all boats and such. The other example I want to give you is from NILROC, the Community College Consortium. And it was before the pandemic it started, but NILROC now has a shared overdrive collection because most of the community colleges did not really have a popular ebook. Many of them have ebook collections really at all, unless they were something that were given to them through Carly or something like that. But popular reading collections, not really in the budget. And so we looked at getting a consortium shared collection in overdrive that all the members add money to, and there's some shared collection development going on there. And that's gotten just great feedback. It seems like every time another member library takes a closer look at it, they kind of raise their hand and go, yes, I want in, because they go from having no ebooks to like, here, you have 3,000 ebooks of popular material that your people are actually asking for like overnight. So, and some say in what gets collected, right? So that's been a very successful model. And I think Mill Rock will probably look at how we can build out that collaborative collection development model in the future as well. I'm gonna probably speed this up a little bit. I don't think there's as much to say about this, except to say that the way we delivered instruction online had to change rapidly, and we've had to really rethink in an online context, do we still retain kind of like a traditional instructional model, or do we start building content that can be shared in advance, that can be rewatched by students whenever they need? One of my colleagues started recording her sessions in chunks, which is not new and novel, but it was she started that practice, and she started going back and looking at the usage statistics and seeing that a class of 15, like a health sciences class where the cohorts are very small, a class of 15 would have 50 or 60 views on the video. And you're thinking, okay, that tells us that the same students are going back and rewatching the same content over and over again. And she got anecdotal feedback that was actually the case, you know? So the students are interacting with the material differently. We need to shift how we teach differently. So there's a lot of growth to be had in that space. One of the more telling parts of our conversation, I think, was that this big shift to digital has put an incredible, it has really intensified the amount of invisible labor that happens in our organization, things that are difficult to communicate because we're so busy trying to make the system not, you know, because that mantra of, yeah, the electronic resources coordinator doesn't want their work to be visible. If I'm doing it right, you don't even know I exist. It's the same thing what we've talked about with Rails, right? But unfortunately, it's more time intensive. It requires a higher level of skill and complexity, and the staffing may be more complex. So all of these things are challenges. That it's not just a one-for-one trade-off from you know, an in-person first to a digital first modality. So how do we advocate again for people around us and above us understanding how much invisible labor goes into it? The concept of magical ILL, you know, like the magic of, you know, we're saying we love that delivery just happens and stuff, but at the same time, people don't have any concept of what is required to make that happen. So it's lovely to be thought of as magical, but it doesn't usually translate into budgets, right? Or recognition even. I think a lot of this stuff is probably not surprising, so I'm not going to really spend much time on it, but the challenges that everyone faced were around how to manage our spaces during the COVID crisis, because many of us were closed for quite a bit of time. So it wasn't just a couple of months. It was, we were closed for a year with just a small contingent on campus, right? So, you know, it really showed, it really stressed every area of our operation, taking it out that long. Access to certain collections was limited for a very long time unless you could figure out getting a digitization process set up in place and, you know, navigating any copyright implications. People who are working on campus versus people who are working at home for a year. I mean, this causes all sorts of stressors on personnel and management. We're all still dealing with these, but these are new challenges kind of on top of everything else that we've experienced in the past. Okay, reciprocal borrowing. So I did a lot of data crunching to do because I was trying to steer clear of just anecdotal stuff. I wanted to give you kind of a background, and maybe it's something we can build on with more anecdotal data in the future. But so the clearest path between reciprocal borrowing and between academic libraries and other kinds of libraries is being in a shared catalog, right? So academic libraries are overwhelmingly members of iShare in Illinois. So that means that the few libraries that happen to be in a shared catalog environment, you know, this is the few within the Rails suite of systems of shared catalogs that actually have academic members. There's 2 in each of these catalog consortia. And so you can see this is not they're a very small representative part of that of each consortia. I did a rough count. This is very, very rough. Of, you know, there's, for example, there's 126 members in Prairie Cat. There are 29 academic libraries who are kind of within the region that Prairie Cat covers. There's 29 members that are, you know, in some way regionally associated, but they are not connected by a catalog. So, you know, if there's only 2, there's 27 that have no affiliation through reciprocal borrowing probably. And you can see it, the numbers for Resource Sharing Alliance and oops, the other one as well. So, you know, those numbers are very small. So the data I want to show you next, I pulled it from member library websites. So, you know, it's just, there's no report to go look at. There's no person to go ask for this kind of information. So I tried to get a sense of how are people communicating to community borrowers that they're welcome to come and borrow something directly, separate from reciprocal borrowing, where you have a card, your card allows you to come in and check something out. Community borrowers, we validate you as a borrower. You can come in and have a card directly. You know, you are in a sense a direct patron of ours, right? So with community colleges, the picture is actually pretty good. I mean, a lot of us say, yes, we are welcome. We welcome district residents to come in and get a card. Many colleges do not actually have any information on their website, but that in no way, and this is true for every slide after this, that in no way means they're not doing it. It just means it's not being shared. It's not readily available to understand to the person who just wants to know. A few do not, and they tend to center in the city, in city colleges particularly. Notably, shout out to Joliet Community College, Joliet Junior College. They are the only one that says they're open to all Illinois residents with an ID. I thought that was like, oh, okay. Anybody in Illinois can have a card at Joliet. And Moraine Valley says anybody in the Rails service, in the service area with a public library card, I believe was the qualification on that one. So if you had a card anywhere in Rails, you could be a borrower at Moraine. And I was like, okay, some interesting examples of kind of going beyond what is kind of the mandate for community colleges to just be accessible to their residents. With the universities, with the public universities, again, it's kind of a mixed bag again, and I've given the designations for each of the universities in the different blocks here. So NIU and Illinois State both say all Illinois residents. And I think they mean the same thing when they're saying community members at Western and at Northeastern. They're saying community members have a card. They're not just specifying Illinois residents. So I think, again, broad inclusion of anybody, Chicago State, Governor State, with more limitations. You know, every library has policies are developed for all sorts of reasons. So, you know, but obviously in general, the universities are seeking to be available as broadly as possible. So then this other big pot is of the private institutions, and I've included for-profit and nonprofit here. Good chunk of them are a no. A lot of them are very, very small with a very narrow focus and very small collections. And so there's a lot of reasons why they would probably not be open. But there were some surprising examples of very, very small libraries that were like, yeah, anybody can have a library card here. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like just different service philosophies, right? And again, a big chunk of no information here, probably not getting requests as often for that kind of information as public institutions might. So, you know, they might, again, offer a card, but they're not really highlighting that in their information resources. A few of them had required like a Friends of the Library or have a membership, and you could have a card for $25 or $10 or $50, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the overview, I think, of what that looks like. I think there's a lot of questions that potentially could that provokes a whole bunch of questions for me, but I think it sets the landscape a little bit. Very quickly, I'm just going to very, very quickly, because I don't end this meeting. Looking at dual credit as an avenue for libraries to collaborate with academic schools and academic libraries to collaborate. basic idea with dual credit is just one early entry point for students in high school to start receiving college credit. There's dual enrollment, there's credit, acknowledgements. There's all sorts of arrangements where students can, start accumulating college credit before they graduate. But the basic ideas are to, just get people in the college pipeline earlier, save people money, just get people thinking of themselves as a college student, and just better alignment in general. And I'll just say this, there's one of the challenges around this topic is that like dual credit with community colleges is organized and managed by the Illinois Community College Board. And for four-year colleges, it's through Illinois Board of Education. So the data is not all in the same spot. So I didn't go as far as combining these two different data sets, but I think—
And not all of them are in Illinois.
Exactly. The other piece is that I couldn't find, I didn't have time to go like deep on this, but there are many relationships with dual credit schools outside of the state. So there's some work trying to kind of push the dial back the other direction. But this just gives you a sense of what dual credit has looked like in the community with the community colleges over the last 5 years. It's a growing piece of what we do. It's worth noting that they are counted among our student head count. Most reports usually break them out with like, here's your head count with dual credit, here's your head count without dual credit. For one large reason being they don't pay tuition to the school, right? So, there's some implications for how you count people versus who's actually paying tuition. So this is a growing area, and it obviously has lots of benefits. So everyone's thinking about it. Thought you might like to just kind of see how it breaks down: career technical program versus transfer courses, more like in writing and things like that. And then this is like the top 10 classes that are taken in Illinois. I can tell you that this is not this graph does not hold true consistently across school to school though. It's the exact opposite at COD, and we're kind of the anomaly. We have tons of CTE and a very limited amount of transfer. It's completely different at the next school. So this is a state. This is very much a representation of the state view of dual credit, it will not necessarily represent an individual institution. I'm not going to read all this. I just kind of put it here just to document it. But in 2018, there was an update to the Dual Credit Quality Act, which really focuses on articulating and strengthening the relationship between districts and community colleges specifically. Even though they're not the only providers of dual credit instruction, it really it sets out some principles and model agreements and things that, standards that should be met. And the thing I wanted to, because the question was, how do libraries support dual credit, right? This is an incredibly difficult question to answer with the information that was available online. The only place I could really find any reference that would kind of support what our obligations are is I bolded it in the middle toward the bottom of this screen where it says the academic supports and, if applicable, guidance that will be provided to students participating in the program by the high school and the community college district. These are things that need to be in place. Academic supports very broadly. I looked at the model agreement. It doesn't make any reference of library. It talks a lot about textbooks, but doesn't get really beyond that. So there's just kind of a general lack of they're not thinking about it. They're also not tracking it. They're also not like specifically mandating it. It's not articulated. So not surprisingly, I gotta tell you, my initial assessment, I could not find good evidence of how academic libraries are sharing how they're supporting dual credit students. I know they are. It's just not something we're really talking about or putting out there. I think a lot of the communication is back channel communication within its internal communication between library and instructors, library and school administrators, if there's any. In some of the conversations I've started to have with schools in my district, I just think there's a lot of barriers to having those conversations. I think it usually goes this, I think it's typical for schools to say you're a student and you have access to the library, and they might give you a flyer or something that says, here's how you get to the library. But frankly, it just relies quite a bit on very person-to-person relationships and what an individual instructor might want for their class, because they also have a library on site, and there's lots of things to consider when saying this is your library now, not this. We need to kind of keep the support and service environment as consistent as we can for students, even if they're still learning at their home institution. So there is not a lot of evidence, but I do know anecdotally that it's happening. And I think that it's just a big opportunity for further exploration. I know it has huge implications for us if we're going to do it very meaningfully and intentionally. I haven't even been able to kind of quantify what kind of resources are needed to make that really happen. So my few observations about some of the obstacles are things like, let's looking at the scale, the scale between some of the, just using the community colleges as an example, I think that it's true of the state universities as well. One particular community college has a service area that can span up to 9 counties. I mean, not the whole county, but I was trying to be as accurate as I can. Like, how many counties does this one community college district have even a small bite of, right? I mean, there were like 3 that had like 9 counties. Like that's a, you're not going to probably build big relationships with people in this one little teeny tiny part, but it just kind of gives you a sense of it. A good chunk of them only are centered in one county, but many, 10 out of 17 that I documented here have touched at least 5 counties. So when we're talking about the scale of one institution to a service area, it's vast. And if you think state universities, that's a completely different proposition. This is an example, and it's not a completely accurate number. It's just kind of a give you it's just a little sample. So like Illinois Central College, in the 2 main districts that are the center of their district, I counted up 119 schools and 36 public libraries in just those 2 main counties that they serve, right? And they have like 5 professional staff that work at 2 locations. So they might be serviced, so they might have enough staff to do what they need to do with their library, but the notion of relationship building, when that's the scale behind it, I think it has to give us some, help us understand how the solutions will really be developed, because it's probably not going to be, well, just go build a relationship with every school who wants to have a relationship with you. It's just unsustainable, right? So I just kind of gave you some examples. It was so funny actually. The list for school libraries in DuPage County. I got to tell you, I absolutely love L2. I couldn't have even done this without it. My last plug on here is actually going to be about that. But I couldn't even pull the list for how many schools there were in DuPage County. It crashed the system 3 times. I really had to go back and just like page through. I'm like, okay, there's 10 pages, 10 schools. It was like, I don't know. It's like, anyways, it was like 30 pages, 10 to a screen. I'm like, okay, 3. It was like, oh, it wouldn't even pull the list. It was so big. I'm like, just gives you some sense of what we're talking about here, right? So yeah, the scale of relationships, I think, is a really critical piece of the struggles. Okay, some suggestions that this is not me, like, this is just things that occurred to me as I was doing this work, was that I think there is an opportunity around reciprocal borrowing to gather up what it looks like in different areas. I think it's just not something that a lot of academic libraries think about quite a bit, frankly. I mean, if you have your shared catalog, those are the people you connect with. But if there's things that we could be doing to develop like a model reciprocal relationship, I think that there are a lot of libraries that would see that as a wonderful way to engage in outreach with their population. It has to be something that harmonizes with their LMS and how they can manage patrons and stuff. So that some serious thought would have to go into any kind of real meaningful recommendations. But I think that there's something there to be said for how do they do it other places? What's working, and the default questions are, is it what kind of benefits do you get from it? Of course. On community borrowers, there was so much inconsistency in how people talk about community borrowers. They call them absolutely everything under the sun. They have very different rules, different ways of describing, like small changes in policy. I think there's maybe an opportunity for Rails to lead in terms of saying, you know, if you do have community borrower cards, these are things we recommend that you include. And this is, and you might want to consider making it visible in the following ways, you know, like showing some examples of how to do this well, and maybe finding some consistency. I think if you found like 4 libraries that had slightly different policies and they were all just a little bit different, and you told them, do you guys want to just find one common way you do this? I think a lot of people would be like, yeah, let's just make it easier for people to understand what it means to be a community borrower. I think there's actually room for collaboration around that topic. And I wonder if there's opportunities to maybe leverage the infrastructure of L2 to gather up what community borrowers, information about access for community borrowers. It's something you could consistently look up and say, this is what we allow, you know. So that just struck me as a potential opportunity for gathering and presenting that information. I had to do a lot of this by looking at physical maps of things because the community college districts were not well represented in some of the mapping tools that we have available for overlaying data and stuff. So I think if we want to build relationships with academic libraries, we're going to have to do a better job of creating ways to visualize how we connect to each other. The directory is a huge, huge asset. But there's that extra step of trying to understand how close you are to people and connecting that, taking that mapping data and getting it back to the directory data. Like I think there's a lot of really strong resources on the table, and I wonder if there's ways to make them talk to each other a little bit better to answer the questions people might have. And potentially documenting how these relationships look in different places so we could assess for ourselves as a system, how well are we doing at connecting with each other and model out some good stuff. Last plug, L2, I think it's a great resource, not just for individual libraries to understand their own service area better, but to kind of visualize what the potential relationships are there and actually start with a name. I'm not sure how many people are really thinking of it as that. I don't think they're thinking of it as a place to cultivate leads. I think there's an opportunity for us to promote it as that kind of resource. And for researchers, I think anybody who's looking at education, library policy and public policy, I think it's just a huge source of data. So in welcoming people to look at our data and use it, I think would be really awesome. I just see the future of how we can do a better job of building connections with people. I think a lot of it is going to come through data. That's just, I know I can draw a lot more conclusions when I have data. So, and make a plan. So that was what I wanted to share with you today. I took a lot of time, so probably is not a lot of time for questions, but I'm certainly happy to follow up or address anything that you're thinking of.
I have to thank you. I have to thank you because so many things that you would mention, I could relate to. I just retired from academic library, and it's like, I wish I knew you so I could talk about this because a lot of it has to do with community borrowing. I mean, this is something that we talked about even at the town hall on Tuesday. I mean, it's so important and there's so much confusion. And I think that what you said just clarifies, it crystallizes everything for me. It's just like I'm sitting over here saying, yes, yes.
That's why it's confusing. It's like it absolutely, people are not slow. It's confusing. Like it's not obvious what you can have or not have, you know.
Thank you very much.
That was a really good presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. That was, there's so many things to learn from there, especially how, public library, I was just thinking just even in terms of the digital divide and especially, I would suggest we take just a little bit of a break, if that's okay with people, just to, we do have a closed session that's coming up. I just want to give people a chance to stretch a little bit, but thank you, Jennifer, so much. I look forward to talking with you more about it. What do you think, Tom? Is that a good idea, or do you want to keep on going? It's up to you guys.
Sounds like a good idea. Let's come back at
5 minutes, I think is probably right.
5 minutes? Okay,
Yeah.
5 minutes. We're going to go into session. Due to the length of our session today, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the closed session. We could delay it to January for time purposes, or we could request a written statement on the questions that have been posed to be covered in executive session, or we can continue on to executive session. Anyone have any?
I suggest we ask our attorney to reply to our questions that we have for the closed session and get those back, and then proceed after we get answers.
Okay. We probably need a motion for that.
Or do we want to make a motion and then have additional discussion, or?
Yeah.
Can I ask Becky a clarifying question? What do you mean by move on, Becky? I don't know what you mean.
Oh, I
That's
meant,
what you said.
I mean, we can go into closed session and discuss it, but I don't know if I want to go through everything on that agenda. I think getting written responses might be better, but we can go into closed session and discuss that.
Okay. Got it.
This is Scott. I agree with Becky. I think it would be a more fruitful closed session if we had the attorney's answers to those things first.
Yeah, when you're done, you can just leave.
Yes.
Okay.
But they want to go into closed session to discuss that.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. With that being said, let's go on to Rails board member reports. Does anyone have any news they would like? Oh, but thank you, Jennifer, for your report. It was fantastic.
That was excellent.
Does anyone have any news they'd like to share about their library or their area?
I do. Our library is coming closer. We had a council vote on our expansion renovation, and we had 7 council members supporting the library expansion renovation and 2 who were against it. But slowly but surely, we're making some headways, which is really gratifying to know, and especially for the library staff. They've been waiting like a couple decades for expansion. And also, I have a question. We had our board meeting on Tuesday evening, and with all the talk about the infrastructure bill that's going to be down, I said that I would ask of Rails, how is this going to affect libraries in general? Will we get anything, will we benefit in any way? And then I asked Jim, so Jim, to provide some explanation.
I think that Greg might be a source. Greg, do you have anything you could offer on Diane's question?
I can't even get unmuted. I'm sorry. I apologize. Can you repeat that?
There we go. Oh, he went away.
Greg, it's the effect of the infrastructure package that was just passed. I think you touched on it on your ISL presentation. And my research indicates that it'll be mostly through the broadband support. There's 65 billion set aside for that.
It appears, yes.
And that's how it benefit libraries indirectly at least.
Correct. And most of that is directed through the governors and the offices of broadband. And that's where we're, of course, looking at that with the Library Association.
But the structural is kind of, is pretty much on roads and overpasses and energy efficiency and things like that. But the broadband appears to be the it's not to build libraries, that infrastructure is not to build libraries. But in a nutshell, it looks like the broadband is the part of that law that would most directly affect libraries.
Would that include all libraries, all types of libraries? benefit, private, public?
Yeah, and it's directed to underserved areas that to make broad internet access more affordable, especially to low-income people. But the details at this programs behind that at this point are pretty sketchy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else under the member reports?
This is
If
Scott.
not,
I just
let's,
want
yeah, Scott.
I was just going to brag a little bit that my library staff at the Romeoville branch library is just crazy about Halloween, and they planned a Halloween haunted house, and we got 578 people to attend it. And
Wow.
and that's with COVID, all COVID measures in place. So we socially distanced each group going through, and we metered them and made sure everybody was safe and wearing masks. But yeah, we still got nearly 600 people to attend, so it's great.
And the entry fee was filling out and getting a library card?
Right.
Well, that's a good
awesome.
thing for your library, Scott. Thank you. Any others? Okay, so then let's move on to meeting recap and agenda building for the next board meeting. We do not have a meeting in December, so everybody can celebrate the holidays. Our next meeting is a special board meeting for strategic planning on January 28th at 11 a.m., followed by lunch, then our regular board meeting. With everything we talked about today, I'm sure we'll have plenty of things on the agenda for that meeting. Thank you all. The board will move into closed session to discuss matters pertaining to collective negotiation as per 5 Illinois compiled statutes, Chapter 120, Paragraph 2, Section 2C2, which states, exceptions, a public body may hold closed meetings to consider the following subjects: collective negotiation matters between the public bodies and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees. May I have a motion to move into executive session?
So,
Alex, thank you, Alex. Second?
Second, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Emily, please call roll.
Alice Creason. Here. Robin Hellenthal. Here. Diane Hollister. Chris Kenny.
Here.
Jennifer McIntosh.
Here.
Scott Poynton.
Here.
Tricia Smith. Here. Becky Sprafford.
Yes.
Beth Tiffin.
Here.
Monica Tolba. Alex Vancina.
yes.
Karen Boydick.
Yes.
And Hallie Cox. Oh, and Thomas Stagg.
Yes.
We still have a quorum, even though Monica and Hallie had to leave.
Okay, thank you. All others need to leave except for Deidre, Monica, Mark, and Emily. Okay. Thank you all for your attendance on behalf of the Rails Board. May I wish you all a safe and happy Thanksgiving and holiday season. I adjourn this meeting at, was it 3:48? Thank you very much. Have a great holiday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
See you
Happy
soon.
Thanksgiving.
Happy
Bye, Mark.
Thanksgiving.